Every lie begins with a truth. Every monster was once someone's child, and every apocalypse has a prophet. But in the quiet suburbs of Arizona, Lori Vallow wasn't thinking about the end of the world. She was just living a life that, on the surface, looked perfect. But beneath the surface of family photos and suburban bliss, something dark was stirring. A dangerous idea, a promise of prophecy, and that promise would lead to a chilling belief that the people she was sworn to protect, her own children, had become obstacles, zombies. A young girl named Tylee, a playful boy named GJ. They didn't vanish in the darkness. They vanished in the blinding light of their mother's radical faith. And when investigators finally uncovered the truth, buried beneath layers of deception and Idaho soil, it was a discovery that would shock the world, redefine evil, and prove that sometimes the most disturbing monsters wear the mask of motherhood. The question is, how did a seemingly normal, vibrant woman become known as the Doomsday Cult Mom? Meet Tylee Ryan. She's 17, sharp, vibrant, and fiercely protective of her little brother, a typical teenager navigating life, school, and social media. And this is Joshua JJ Vallow, adopted 7 years old, full of joy and curiosity. Despite the challenges of his autism spectrum disorder, he needed routine, he needed consistency, above all, he needed love. And at the center of their world was Lori Vallow, a beautiful, charismatic woman, deeply involved in her faith, married to Charles Vallow, a successful businessman who provided the stable foundation for their family. For years, the Vallows lived what looked like the American dream. Lori had charisma that seemed to draw people in. She was magnetic, she was friendly. But by 2019, that magnetism had pulled her into a very specific, very dark corner of religious fundamentalism. Charles noticed the change first. Lori's casual interest in Latter-day Saint, LDS faith suddenly spiraled into an obsession with apocalyptic literature. She became convinced the end times were near, that she was a major player, a prophetess, in the final battle between good and evil. Lori began using strange, unsettling language. She claimed people around her were dark. She was reading the work of a little-known, self-published author named Chad Daybell, a man obsessed with near-death experiences, translating scripture, and the precise timing of the end of the world. And then, the language turned from spiritual to terrifyingly personal. By January 2019, Charles Vallow was deeply afraid. He filed for divorce. Not because he fell out of love, but because he believed his wife was having a psychotic break. He went to police with a chilling warning. Here is a dramatized 911 call.
My wife has lost her mind. I think she's gone manic. She thinks she's a resurrected being sent here to usher in the second coming. She told me she was going to kill me and that she has an angel who would take care of my body.
Charles Vallow had a secret fear. Lori had started calling him a dark spirit. She believed he had been replaced by a demonic entity. She had a list of people who, she claimed, had been zombified. These zombies, according to her interpretation of the new, radical doctrine she shared with Chad Daybell, needed to be translated, meaning they needed to die so their original, light spirits could return. The police dismissed Charles's claims. They saw a messy divorce. Charles, in fear for his life, moved away. But he had no idea just how close to the line he was walking. Charles was right to be terrified. But could he have ever imagined that the threat wouldn't just be directed at him? If you're already feeling the chill from this story, make sure you like this video right now. It helps us bring these vital true crime stories to light, and let us know in the comments what country you're watching you. Now back to it. In the spring of 2019, Lori and Chad Daybell connected in person at a religious conference. Sparks flew, but these weren't the sparks of normal romance. These were the sparks of shared delusion. Chad Daybell was the ultimate prophet in Lori's eyes, a former grave digger in his native Idaho. He had leveraged his obsession with the apocalypse into a series of self-published fiction books about the end of the world based on his supposed visions. He had a theory about vibrational energy and a complicated scale where he judged how dark or light a person Saul was. Laurie and Chad believed they were the reincarnated versions of ancient religious leaders, destined to lead the 144,000 faithful when Jesus returned. They called their secret group the Church of the Firstborn. In July 2019, Charles Vallow, still legally married to Laurie, traveled back to Arizona. He intended to pick up JJ. He wanted to make sure his son was safe. On the morning of July 11th, Charles arrived at Laurie's sister's home in Chandler, Arizona. What happened next is a matter of debate, but the results are devastatingly clear. Laurie's brother, Alex Cox, was there. He claimed he found Charles in an altercation with Laurie. Alex claimed Charles had struck Laurie with a baseball bat and that, in self-defense, Alex shot Charles twice in the chest. Charles Vallow, the man who had warned police his wife wanted him dead because she thought he was a dark spirit, was now dead on the floor. Charles's death was ruled justifiable self-defense. The police accepted Alex Cox's version of events, that Charles was the aggressor. Laurie and Alex were free. But investigators would later discover something chilling. Only moments after Charles lay dead, Laurie and Alex were allegedly discussing not the horror of the killing, but how to dispose of the body, and more importantly, how to access Charles's life insurance policy, a policy valued at over $1 million. Was Charles Vallow a victim of a spontaneous act of self-defense? Or was this the calculated first step of Laurie and Chad's apocalyptic purge? With Charles dead and the insurance money soon to be settled, Laurie's path to Chad Daybell was clear. Just over a month later, Laurie, Tylee, and JJ packed up their lives and moved 900 miles north to Rexburg, Idaho. They settled into an apartment complex near BYU, Idaho. They were now just blocks away from Chad and his then-wife, Tammy Daybell. Tammy Daybell, a seemingly healthy, beloved school librarian. A mother of 5, she was Chad's rock, but in Laurie's eyes, Tammy was a complication, a barrier to her prophetic destiny. Chad, meanwhile, was secretly telling friends and followers that his marriage was over and that Tammy had become dark. He spoke openly about Tammy's supposed upcoming death, and then the purge began in earnest. On October 9, 2019, someone in a dark, hooded mask drove to the Daybell home. They fired a paintball gun at Tammy, a bizarre, failed attack. Tammy was understandably rattled, but dismissed it as an isolated prank. Just over a week later, the threat was no longer a paintball. October 19th, Chad Daybell called 911 early that morning. He reported that his wife, Tammy Daybell, had died in her sleep. Chad claimed she had been sick with a cough and simply passed away. Tammy was 49 years old. She was healthy, she was active, but the circumstances were instantly questionable. Local authorities in Fremont County, Idaho, did not request an autopsy. Why? Because Chad Daybell was a respected member of the community. He was a grave digger. He was a familiar, trustworthy face. Her death was ruled natural causes, and Chad pushed for something else, an immediate burial. No, not just burial, immediate cremation. Chad was persuasive. He was grieving, they thought. They listened. Tammy Daybell's body was quickly cremated, erasing a mountain of potential evidence. 2 weeks later, Chad Daybell was on a beach in Hawaii, marrying Laurie Vallow. They were smiling. They were celebrating. 2 people stood between them and their perceived destiny, Charles Vallow and Tammy Daybell. Now, both were dead within 3 months. But as Laurie and Chad celebrated their union under the Hawaiian sun, a far more terrifying truth was unfolding back in Idaho. A truth involving Tylee and JJ. The children hadn't been seen since September. The police wrote off Charles and Tammy's deaths. They swallowed the stories. But now 2 children were missing, and their mother was celebrating on a beach. What did Chad Daybell bury on his property before leaving for Hawaii? And how did a simple welfare check turn into a nationwide manhunt? What do you think? Did Charles and Tammy stand in the way of a true prophet, or a dangerous killer? Tell us your theory in the comments below, and stay tuned because in the next act, we unravel the children's final days and the desperate search that exposed the entire dark conspiracy. The timeline of the children's disappearance is murky, deliberately obscured by the people who were supposed to protect them. But through the eventual, tireless work of law enforcement and family members, we were able to piece together their final terrifying movements. Tylee Ryan was last seen alive on September 8, 2019. Lori Alex Cox Tylee and JJ made a trip to Yellowstone National Park. There are photos that seem normal but carry a heavy, morbid weight now. One photo shows Tylee smiling in the park. It's the last confirmed, independent image of the teenager. When the group returned, Tylee disappeared from the narrative. Later, investigators would find a huge bonfire pit dug deep into the Daybell backyard. What happened to Tylee after that trip? Lori and Chad offered zero answers. Just 2 weeks later, the silence extended to JJ. JJ Vallow was last seen on September 23, 2019. The circumstances are even more mundane, making the later discovery more heartbreaking. Lori's brother Alex Cox was the last person to mention seeing JJ alive. After that, silence. Lori told people JJ was enrolled in school, but he never showed up. Tylee was too old to be easily hidden. JJ, with his special needs, would stand out. But Lori and Chad acted as if nothing was wrong. They sent texts from Tylee's phone, pretending she was alive. They withdrew JJ's social security benefits. They continued their lives, preparing for the apocalypse they so desperately believed in. But someone was watching. Someone was worried. The person who finally broke the case open was Kay Woodcock, Charles Vallow's sister and JJ's paternal grandmother. After weeks of being unable to reach JJ and suspicious of Lori's strange behavior and the sudden death of her husband, Kay contacted the Rexburg Police Department. She asked for a simple welfare check. She needed to know that JJ was safe. On November 26, 2019, officers knocked on the door of Lori Vallow's apartment. What they heard was a web of deceit instantly spun by the doomsday couple. Lori told the officers JJ was staying with Kay Woodcock's brother, Garth, in Arizona. The officers, relieved, left. But Kay and her husband, Larry, knew this was a flat-out lie. Garth didn't exist. When the Rexburg police realized they had been lied to, they returned the next day, November 27, with more serious questions. And what did they find? Nothing. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, along with Alex Cox, were gone. They had packed their bags in the dead of night and fled. Lori, a woman who had just married a doomsday prophet, had now vanished into thin air with her new husband, leaving behind 2 missing children and a trail of suspicious deaths. They were gone. But where do 2 prophets preparing for the apocalypse run when the entire country is suddenly looking for them? The search for Lori ended abruptly in January 2020. They were found in a luxury resort town in Kauai, Hawaii, tanned, smiling, relaxed. They were enjoying life on the tropical island, while Tylee and JJ were on every national news broadcast. The authorities demanded that Lori produce the children. Their response was cold, defensive, and frankly, bizarre. They said nothing. They refused to cooperate. They went for walks on the beach. They seemed utterly unconcerned with the missing children, even as the world watched. Lori was eventually arrested in Hawaii on child desertion charges. Chad was not arrested yet, but the investigation had now moved to their home base, Rexburg, Idaho. The focus shifted from a missing persons case to a homicide investigation, and the lead investigator, Detective Ray Hermosillo, felt a deep, chilling certainty. These children were not missing. They were dead. The police had a theory, but they needed evidence. They needed to know where to dig. The key to finding Tylee and JJ didn't come from Lori or Chad. It came from the conscience of a single person close to the couple. This one confession, this one act of humanity, led investigators to the most disturbing coordinates of the entire case: Chad Daybell's rural Idaho property. Don't miss the next shocking twist. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Join our community of true crime solvers, because what they found buried next would blow the entire conspiracy wide open. In February 2020, Lori Vallow was extradited back to Idaho to face charges, but these were still charges of child desertion and misdemeanor resisting arrest. The homicide charges hadn't yet been filed. Chad Daybell remained free. The months that followed were a media frenzy. Lori sat in jail silent, unwavering in her belief that she was doing God's work. Chad continued to defend his actions publicly, posting cryptic messages about his connection to the other side. But the pressure was immense, not only from the police but from the relentless national attention focused on that tiny patch of Idaho soil. The public, the victim's family, and the police all knew the truth was hidden in plain sight. They just needed the search warrant. The authorities spent months building an ironclad case, connecting the dots between Chad's doomsday writings, the deaths of Charles and Tammy, the disappearance of the children, and the financial trail of the insurance money. In early June 2020, investigators finally received the critical, breakthrough piece of information they needed. A confidential informant, someone close to the inner circle of Lori and Chad's fringe religious group, broke ranks. This person could no longer lie with the devastating secret. The tip was specific. The locations were precise. They pointed straight to Chad Daybell's 5-acre property in rural Salem, Idaho, a sprawling piece of land Chad used for his work as a grave digger and cemetery sexton. A place where things went into the ground and were forgotten. The police immediately secured the search warrant. The ground search was about to begin, the search that everyone feared would confirm the most devastating possible outcome. Think about the family, Kay and Larry Woodcock, waiting, hoping for a miracle that they knew deep down would never come. Imagine their agony as they waited for the shovel to hit Earth. June 9, 2020. This was the day the mystery ended and the horror began. Dozens of officers, forensic specialists, and FBI agents descended on Chad Daybell's property. They went straight to the locations given by the informant. First, they focused on a small area near a tree, far back from the house. They began to dig. Within minutes, they found remains. They were human remains, decomposed and initially difficult to identify. But the location, the concealment, it all pointed to Tylee Ryan. The state of Tylee's remains was horrific. She had been dismembered and burned, her body scattered in multiple locations, then buried deep beneath the earth. The savage violence suggested a deliberate, monstrous attempt to erase the young woman entirely. As the first team worked their grim task, a second team began excavating a small, shallow grave closer to the main house. This time they found the body of a small boy. The body was wrapped tightly in plastic and duct tape. A plastic bag had been placed over his head. It was J.J. Vallow. The little boy who needed routine and stability was found in a grave, less than 20 yards from the man who had preached about light and darkness. The emotional peak of the investigation had been reached. The children of the apocalypse were found, not raptured, not translated by angels, but murdered and buried by the two people who claimed to be preparing them for the second coming. Chad Daybell, who was watching the entire operation from the porch, was arrested immediately. The case had transitioned fully from missing persons to capital murder. The bodies were found. The parents were in custody. But the trial would reveal the chilling specifics of the why. What did Chad and Lori believe they needed to do to fulfill their prophecy? And how did a simple belief in the end times turn into a license to kill? The final, devastating text messages between Tylee and Lori, and the chilling recording of Alex Cox, would soon expose the mechanics of the entire, terrifying plot. If this story has shaken you to your core, please hit that like button. It's a small way to remember Tylee and JJ. In the next act, we examine the shocking evidence presented at the trial and the bizarre, cult-like motives for murder. As investigators worked to determine the who and the how, the court focused on the why. And in the world of true crime, if it's not love or revenge, it's often money. Lori Vallow was desperate for money. She was entitled to over $1 million from Charles Vallow's life insurance policy, naming her as the beneficiary. But there was a complication, a clause that would deny the payout if she were found responsible for his death. The financial motive extended to the children. Tylee had a $30,000 life insurance policy, and JJ received $1,900 a month in Social Security benefits for his special needs. These funds continued to be collected by Lori after the children were killed. The date the benefits were collected lines up exactly with the dates the children went silent. The evidence painted a grim picture. The children were not just dark spirits or zombies. They were also a financial drain and potentially insurance payouts waiting to happen. The cult's prophecy and greed were perfectly aligned. But to dismiss this only as greed would be to ignore the chilling, radical belief that fueled the violence. This was truly the first step in a doomsday purge. Chad Daybell claimed he could determine if a person's soul had been taken over by a dark spirit, effectively turning them into a zombie. The goal of his group was to identify these zombies and, through prayer and ritual, release the original spirit trapped inside. Laurie used this terrifying, made-up doctrine to justify the death of everyone who stood in her way. Charles Vallow was a dark spirit, Tammy Daybell was dark, and Tylee and JJ, they too were classified as zombies. Their spirits replaced by evil entities that needed to be translated before the second coming. The trial revealed text messages where Laurie and Chad discussed these zombies with chilling indifference, referring to them with code names. Tylee's fate was sealed when Laurie described her as defiant and difficult to control. JJ's fate was sealed when his caregivers observed Laurie's rapidly cooling affection for her sweet, special needs son. If they truly believed they were fulfilling a prophecy, who else was on their list? Was the entire Daybell family safe? The answer lay with the third, critical death connected to this cult: Alex Cox. Alex Cox was Laurie's unwavering enforcer. He was the one who shot Charles Vallow. He was the one who was seen with Tylee's remains at the Yellowstone Park. And he was the one who was last seen with JJ before the boy vanished. Alex was the common denominator, the man who literally dug the grave and buried the evidence. But Alex Cox wouldn't make it to trial. In December 2019, while Laurie and Chad were in Hawaii, Alex Cox died suddenly in his own home, because of death. Initially ruled a blood clot in his lung. But the family, the police, and the public suspected foul play. Alex knew too much. He was the weak link. Did the cult decide to translate him next to tie up the final loose end? His death remains one of the greatest lingering mysteries in this horrific case. Without Alex, the complete, minute-by-minute details of the murders of Tylee and JJ may never be known. This case stands as a terrifying example of how deep, radical delusion can turn a mother into a monster and transform faith into a tool for murder. The search for the children exposed a vast, chilling conspiracy. But even after the convictions, the question remains, was the true author of this apocalyptic horror Chad, the prophet, or Laurie, the devoted disciple? What do you think? Let us know in the comments below who you believe was the true mastermind. If you were on the jury, would you have given them life or the death penalty? Don't forget to subscribe for the upcoming final acts of the trial, where we reveal the jury's agonizing decision and the final emotional statements from the victims' families.